Hello and welcome to Faith Matters. This is the show where we look at current issues through the prism of faith and belief. We now have an email address where you can contact us, faithmatters@baytvliverpool.com. Why not write to us and let us know what you think about the show and any subjects you'd like us to feature. Today as my guests I have Vicky Ponsonby-Martin and Bryce Evans. Hi guys, welcome. How about introducing yourselves? Tell us a little bit about where you're from and the projects you represent.
I'm Vicky. I work for St Andrew's Community Network, which is based in Clubmore. We do lots of things. We do debt advice, mental health work, but I get to oversee North Liverpool Food Bank.
Great. Bryce?
I'm a historian, a lecturer at Liverpool Hope University, but I also run Manor Community Kitchen, which is similar to a food bank, a little bit different, but addressing the issue of food poverty as well.
Okay, so Vicky, how do food banks work and why do we need them?
Okay, assuming that people are watching this not really knowing what a food bank is, we provide crisis support. We provide a food parcel for families and single people when they're in crisis for 3 days. Obviously, food bank is about more than just food. It's about community engagement, it's about signposting, it's about walking alongside somebody. So there are lots of things in between. We've got approximately about 78 volunteers, and they do lots of things from logistics right the way up to actually serving people in the distribution centres.
So it's a big operation.
It's quite big, yeah.
And you're based at St Andrew's Church in Clubmore?
We are.
Yeah, and you got any other centres that you
Yeah, we've got 8 centres across
8
North
centres.
Liverpool.
Give us an example of a couple of others.
Okay. Each Trussell Trust Food Bank, there's 3 in Liverpool. I have 8 centres that I look after. So the Holy Trinity Church, Salvation Army, some churches in Norris Green. So they're spread out.
All church-based, basically?
Yeah, they're all church-based.
Okay, well, it sounds like a full-time job.
Yes.
More than a full-time job.
Yes.
Yeah. And so just tell me, why do people need food banks in this day and age? I mean, we live in a developed country, don't we? People have enough food.
I think there are lots of reasons why people need a food bank. If we go back to some of the Trussell stats, it used to be that people just needed a food bank for benefit delays and benefit changes. But last year, we've seen low income rise from 16% to 22%. So actually, it's people that are working now using food banks.
So that's the people who, when you say low income rise, that's the percentage of people with a low income.
So they're people who work or might have 0 contract hours, and actually food poverty is starting to affect them in a big way.
Okay, so Bryce, you represent a community kitchen. Tell us a little bit about that and how that might differ from a food bank.
Well, we're a lot smaller. We wouldn't wish to compete with food banks, and I've seen firsthand actually some of the great work that Vicky does and the great work that food banks do. The emergency food provision that they give is wonderful, and I would not criticise that one jolt. What I worry about is the broader political issue of food banks, and I worry about the sustainability of food banks with a lack of state support. I think food banks are great because they give a voluntary ethos. They provide food where it's really needed. And as Vicky's explained, a lot of other resources there, ranging from mental health and all sorts of benefit advice. But food banks differ, as you know, and some food banks don't offer that range of services. Some food banks are a lot smaller and they just offer emergency parcels or emergency packages. And I worry, I suppose, and I wonder how that can be sustainable. And I suppose the community kitchen model doesn't seek to replace food banks. It looks to just run a model whereby people are cooking and eating fresh food, because the food bank model generally is, as you mentioned, non-perishable food, with some exceptions. And some food banks do have cafes attached to them. So that's what I'd like to see, is more food banks operating more like community kitchens or cafes, where people have a place to perhaps cook the food they get or prepare the food, to learn some cookery skills around that food, which is offered in some food banks, but not all. I'd like to see more in terms of fresh food, and I think it's fairly easy really for the state to abrogate its responsibility by pointing to food banks and saying, great, voluntary ethos, big society.
So it's like a get-out clause for the state in a way, or it could become that.
I think it is slightly, and I mean, I think it's great, don't get me wrong, that you have supermarkets donating food, non-perishable food, to food banks. But in a way, I think that gets the state off the hook a little bit. and I think it sort of makes the risk issue a corporate risk issue. I'd like to see the state doing a little bit more in terms of financial support, in terms of infrastructural support, so that it frees up a bit of time for the food banks to develop more of that community aspect. And that's really the only way in which we differ, is try and develop a bit more in terms of fresh food, so it's not just non-perishable, so you're getting people eating and cooking together and experiencing community together, and delivering something which is a little bit more sustainable than just an emergency handout for food.
So your community kitchens, where are they?
It's
in Liverpool?
Very small. We're based in South Liverpool. It's a roving community kitchen, so if there's, it works on the basis of if there's a youth group or a faith-based group who want us to come and do very basic stews and scouses and broths with them. It's not fancy whatsoever. It's not haute cuisine. It's just basically going into different places, and it's sort of a mobile community kitchen. At the moment, we run one in Liverpool Hope University. We run a couple in South Liverpool.
So you're teaching people how to cook? Are they cooking for themselves,
no,
or you're cooking for them?
It's certainly not a didactic thing. It's more about community, but it's about people coming together and getting cookery skills, but I'm certainly not teaching to them. It's about them getting the food, working with the food, cooking fresh food, getting to know how you incorporate food into a meal. You do hear some horror stories, you know, in terms of food banks, people getting the food and then not having the means, perhaps not even having the means in order to heat the food, to prepare the food. So we're just sort of providing that service, if you like. It's all what we're trying to do is a bit more of community.
So is it a church-based initiative, yours, or is it independent?
No, it's not. I mean, our name is obviously faith-inspired, manna from heaven, but it's not faith-based. We welcome people of all faiths and none. We work with faith-based groups, active age retirement groups, but we work also with groups that are not faith-based whatsoever. But the big point is to rediscover perhaps a sense of community around food, which a lot of food banks don't give. And if you read the Feeding Britain report, which came out recently, the parliamentary report, it makes the point that in a lot of food banks, it's just a process of handing over the food, and there's no aspect of eating together, sitting down, breaking bread, quite simply. So what we do is not highfalutin whatsoever.
Yeah. It's interesting you should mention Scouse, because I've just been writing something for a book, and it was on hospitality, this section, and my research showed me that Scouse actually, some people argue that it really came into its own as a meal as a result of the potato famine. It was a poverty meal, which is a fascinating. I mean, we all love Scouse, you know, and blind Scouse if we're vegetarians. But so, Vicky, tell me, how do you respond to that? You know, food banks are not enough. We need an additional kind of form of resourcing. What's your take on that?
I agree. Food banks aren't enough. And as a Trussell Trust food bank, we have always been a spode in the wheel of tackling food poverty, not actually controlling the whole learning, development and growth of food poverty in our city. We do provide fresh fruit and vegetables. We work with over 200 organisations, and LMH, that's one of our sponsors, they've actually decided to help us with fresh fruit and vegetables. So we do get that, and they do go out to the people that we see each week. And that is a very new project, but it is about working together with organisations like Bryce's and lots of other organisations across Liverpool to help get people from that crisis point back to sustaining themselves as well.
Okay, and so again, Vicky, Trussell Trust, or the statistics coming from there, tell us that there are 2 food banks opening every week across the UK currently. Is that correct?
That's a Trussell Trust stat, and I did go and check yesterday. When that came out in September last year, it's actually slowed down quite a lot now. So
And any reason for that, why it's slowed down?
I think it's because we're becoming more effective at working together with other organisations. So the growth of food bankers, you know, has stayed quite steady at the moment. But that's besides all the independent food banks that might be set up. There are 10 Trussell Trust food banks in Merseyside, 3 in the Liverpool ward, and each of them have between 1 and 14 distribution centres. So we're quite covered, and we work really well together.
And so how many people are we talking about? Do you know how many people you feed?
Possibly between 120 and 150 a week. That's an average, but each week can change depending on people's circumstances.
And how long are people with you? How long are people, coming to you for food? I mean, you say you're providing for 3 days. But how often are these people coming?
It depends. We want to work with organisations to make sure that person has the full support they need through the crisis that they're going through. Now, that crisis might be a redundancy or a change in job status, or, it could be lots of different reasons. Dependent on them reasons is dependent on the amount of time we walk alongside that person and the support that we give them.
Okay, I'm going to have to break now for the commercial
Okay.
break. That's great. We're back after the break, and we're talking about food banks and community kitchens. Well, welcome back to Faith Matters, and with our guests today, Vicky and Bryce. Continuing on our theme, which is food poverty, food banks and community kitchens. Vicky or Bryce, how many food banks are there in the Merseyside region? Do you know?
There are 10 Trussell Trust food banks, as I'd said before. Each of us will have between 1 and 14 distribution centres. There are 3 Trussell Trust food banks in the Liverpool Council ward, and we work really closely together. But that's without, obviously, the independent food banks and the community kitchens and the other
So they're
models
not
of food
all
poverty.
church-based,
Not all of them.
faith-based?
All the Trussell Trust ones are faith-based.
Faith-based.
Yeah.
I know the one at the cathedral, which I must give a little bit of a plug
Yeah,
to,
Hope.
which is the Hope
Yeah.
Plus. I know they work with a couple of churches around the city
They
centre,
do.
but also the mosque is
Right,
involved in
brilliant.
supplying food, which I just think is
Yeah.
a great thing, particularly in the light of current events.
Fantastic.
Liverpool is a city where people are coming together to help people in need in that way. So why? Just tell me, why are Vicky, the churches involved with food banks, and what has the gospel message got to say about poverty, food poverty in particular, but poverty in general, and how we resolve it? That's a big question
It is.
to lay your door.
Our motto as a Trussell Trust food bank goes off the verse in Matthew 25:38 about feeding obviously the hungry.
The hungry, yeah.
And that's really important for us as Christians. It's not just the food, it's actually helping churches to walk alongside people. It's helping churches engage with lots of organisations that have never worked with churches before. And that's really successful, and that's really important in communities. It's important we work with other organisations to make people's lives a little bit better.
Because Jesus said, didn't he, that's the test.
Yeah.
I mean, he said, if you want to know what a Christian is, effectively, he said it's somebody who feeds the hungry.
Yeah.
It's somebody who visits the prisoner. It's somebody who, I can't remember them all, heals the sick. It's,
Definitely.
that's the test. It's not about, spouting a doctrine and expecting people to believe it.
It's the most humbling experience as well. And
so you come from your church background, as a kind of, you've said to me before, it's an evangelical kind of background. But Bryce, you come from a kind of nominal Catholic kind of position.
Yeah. And I've seen the work of the Catholic Church in Latin America. For instance, this summer I went to Latin America to research community kitchens and how they work there, which is where we take our inspiration from. And it's something which ties into the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, when he said he was more upset by food poverty here than abroad.
Yeah.
And we've got stuff to learn from the developing world.
Why do you think he said that? I can't remember what he actually said, why that was.
I'm not entirely sure why he said that, but I think the message was right. It's that we can't continue to look askance at the developing world and see food poverty as an issue there. It's an issue for us here, because we do have big poverty problems, we do have big class issues still in this country. So I suppose coming back to the Catholic thing in Peru, saw very much the activist role of the Latin American church, inspired, of course, by liberation theology. But even, I suppose, in the latest writings of Pope Francis, The Joy of the Gospel, I mean, there's a lot of social justice in there compared to his predecessor when he talks about, that the stock market fluctuates in its headline news, an old lady dies of exposure and nobody cares. So I saw very much that strong Catholic ethos at work in community kitchens in Peru. At the same time in Peru, there's a bit of a Protestant revolution.
The Pentecostal,
yeah. So you see a lot of the poorest slums being serviced by community kitchens, which are from the newer evangelical churches. But for me, it's an issue which transcends faith boundaries, and it's something we've got to sort out together.
And do you find that in Peru? Are these groups working together, or are they working
They tend to. The
separately?
difference is in Peru, and again, it's where we can learn from the developing world, and there's a whole lot of history there to do with a struggle for recognition for community kitchens. But the state actually provides the non-perishables in Peru. So the state provides all the cooking oil, the rice, all the basics. And it's then up to the voluntary sector, churches or supermarkets, corporate responsibility, to provide the fruit and veg. So I'd like to see in this country the state doing more perhaps to provide, or local government, non-perishables. Then that puts the burden onto supermarkets to provide the fresh stuff. And if supermarkets are really serious about cutting out food waste, they've got to start providing fresh food, because that's where the food waste lies. So I'd like us to take from that Peruvian model and see supermarkets, etc., handling the fresh food. And it's, as you know, it's a very quick turnover period. But we've got to see more of that in this context, because I think the big food waste problem in this country is the perishable food.
And the situation in Peru with, I spent some time in Argentina and Paraguay a few years back, and similar kind of area, obviously Latin America. Is it the case in Peru that is that the effect, do you think, of liberation theology over sort of a 30-year period on the government? I
think it is. Now, I spoke to a lot of people in the Catholic voluntary sector who are running community kitchens there, and some of them would deny that, and they would be very much on message with the Vatican, which is that we're not quite liberation theology. But you can't deny, and as a historian, I think you can clearly see that very activist role for the Catholic Church has seeped into daily practice over that 30-year period. Now, a lot of people within the sort of Catholic voluntary tradition in South America would be put off by the Marxism of liberation theology.
What, even within the church? Because that was obviously, that Marxist element was a significant thread, wasn't it, through liberation theology? It's almost like a marriage of the two ethos.
But I think although some people would sort of seek to downplay that, you can't deny objectively the influence that that's had in terms of this very activist role of the voluntary sector rolling up its sleeves and getting involved, the faith-based sector getting involved in food poverty. But I also think that it's not enough, and in this country it's not enough for, we don't want to get back to the Victorian situation of rich people and churches sorting out poverty. The state has to get involved, and it's no coincidence that we're talking about an upsurge in food banks where we're seeing the rollback in benefits. So I think of the voluntary sector and voluntary ethos, and the faith-based ethos is so important, and it's so valuable. And when you see it at work, it's like nothing else. But for me, the state also has to do its part.
And Vicky, what do you think from your perspective? I mean, evangelical Christians tend to be, well, as Bryce said, in Latin America, it's true here, kind of to take a non-partisan stance in terms of political campaigning. Are you involved with political campaigning, even locally, towards in your relationship with the council? Putting pressure on?
Yeah, I think political campaigning is the wrong word, certainly for us as a food bank. But one of the things that we do is we do feedback our statistics to local government. And that's really important for us, as do the Trussell. Send all of our stats to central government. And that's important because obviously the government need to see what's going on in their cities and the country at the moment, and they need to see the difficulties that communities are facing regarding food poverty. So we do have to play our part, but that doesn't always mean politically campaigning. It means working in the background and making sure that our information is sent to the relevant sources.
Okay, I was listening we had a breakfast event at the cathedral this morning, the city breakfast, and Bishop Paul was, our new bishop, was talking there, and he was talking about the Faith in the City report, which interestingly, I think was probably influenced by liberation theology thinking, and then it was branded by Thatcher's government as being a Marxist document. I mean, do you think, how much should we be, tell me as a representative of the church, do you think we should be challenging the government, head on in this way about this issue of food poverty?
Yes, I do. And I think the Feeding Britain report that came out recently, I think Archbishop Welby was quite forthright on that issue, and he was right to be. I think that report looks at all the different factors which you've mentioned in terms of the intricacies of the benefit system, that it isn't simple. And that's the part of the bigger picture. There's also a much broader picture of supermarkets pressuring farmers in terms of prices and, you know, global food production, because we're moving towards a global population of 9 billion soon. So we've got to be looking at the whole food poverty thing in a sustainable way. And I think the Feeding Britain report was very good. And in terms of emphasising the role of the voluntary sector, Trussell Trust and groups like ourselves, I think it was spot on. But it's also spot on in saying that the state needs to do more, and that if we want food banks to be a sustainable option, they've got to have some more support.
And can you see it changing after the election, depending on the result? It's hard to predict.
I can, and I would hope to do, but then of course we have an economic situation which doesn't leave a lot of room for wiggle. But I think it's very easy for the government to point to food banks and celebrate the big society, and at the same time let themselves off the hook. And we've seen the challenges of the benefit system, the way that it's got during this administration has got harder. It hasn't become simple for people, and that's why you've an upsurge in demand for food banks. By the way, at a time when we have abundant food production, you know, we've gluts in a lot of production of milk and other goods, you know, that there shouldn't be this food poverty issue. So you can't just rely on the voluntary ethos. I think it's got to be challenged by the state as well.
Okay, we're going to wind down now. Great to have you on the show. Just tell us, how can we get in touch with you? How can our viewers get in touch with you? How can they give?
Okay, you can get in touch with us via our website, which is standrewslive.org.uk. You can telephone us 0151 226 3406, or you can text donate to Liverpool Food Banks, which is HP 66 to 770.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for being on Faith Matters, and we'll see you next time.